Okay, welcome to The Astute Engineer, episode 5. This is an interesting view because we're going to get the perspective from procurement. Martin Abbotson, category manager for many, many years.
Yep.
We'll come on to your history in a moment. Now moving into electronic intelligence, which we'll really dive into. But how did you get into the industry all those years ago then, Martin?
It's a long time ago. I started in buying in, when was it? In the early 80s. So I originally joined the old Marconi organisation as a commercial trainee, where you went around various commercial departments. It was pretty good. I mean, it was one of the first commercial apprenticeships. So you went in accounts, contracts, cost and budget. So dealing customer facing, accounting, buying. And buying was the thing that attracted me, so I went into buying, worked my way up. I was chief buyer in the old Marconi organisation for the flight control division. Pretty interesting stuff. So and in those days, of course, there was no email, so you had a lot of interaction, you were on the phone all the time. Confirmation verbal orders, not really worried about too much T's and C's, just get it in. And it was really quite cut and thrust in those days.
It's interesting when I look at I go back over your history. I've known you for a long time, Marconi, BAE, Selex, Leonardo. I mean, how many business cards do you think you've had for the same company?
Probably about a dozen, something like that.
I think it'd be more.
Yeah.
Where you consider when Selex,
you should frame them.
You should get them all nicely set up. But I mean, to do that kind of work placement, ending up in that buying role. Back then we only had a telephone. I mean, more like
and a telex machine.
And a telex machine. Some of the youngsters may not know what a telex machine is. Do you want to explain that? It's a bit similar to like the cassette.
So I mean, I suppose it came from the old telegram kind of situation where you used to basically confirm an order on the phone, and then the details really, you got someone, you passed a note over to someone, and they sat there and they started banging away, and they would create the order confirmation on the telex machine. So it was, you're employing someone to basically copy what you were doing.
I mean, it's amazing. One of the points I wanted to discuss a bit more about, when you first started out, there was no such thing as a tech stack. You didn't have all the tools around you.
No.
You literally were placing orders off green tickets and carbon copy paper. And by the time you left, the digital transformations hit us. We're very much more about data-driven decisions. What was the biggest challenge, though, when you're, this is an engineering podcast, your procurement, how did you communicate with the engineering team back then?
I think there was a lot more close discussions going on in those days as well. When I worked for the old Marconi organisation, there were on one site there were about 7 different divisions, and each of those divisions had their own manufacturing area. So there was a lot more close-knit interaction. You had engineering teams, you had the production teams, the quality teams, they're all associated with one manufacturing area in that particular division, and then the different division would be doing something else, but then eventually that all merged together, obviously. But it probably wasn't that efficient, but everybody knew what everyone else was doing.
And I mean, it's a key point that's lost now. I think that collaboration piece, I mean, post-COVID, I always find that young engineer, that conversation that they would have over the water cooler, that's gone because people are doing the hybrid working. But, going back to that communication piece, you must have had some major challenges, because some of the projects you were on were high-tech projects. And getting an engineer and a procurement on the same page must have been a challenge for you back then.
I remember working on like Boeing 777, release of that. There was also the Canadair regional jet. They had I remember one of the things that on the Canadair regional jet was we were struggling for a solution that was lightning protection.
Right, okay.
And I mean, I'm not technical, I'm commercial, but I know enough to to kind of help the engineers kind of lead them in a certain direction. And I remember going through those old DATA books,
Yeah.
remember, technical index books,
Yep.
and pouring through those and saying, well, how about if we tried this particular component, this
Yep.
micro semi transall diode or
Mhm.
whatever it is, does that work for you? And having those kind of
Yep.
interactions, but that really has been lost. We've got a lot more data around us, but actually maybe that personal touch
Yeah.
has disappeared, and probably COVID accentuated that really.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
And from a sales viewpoint, I would imagine it's the same for you, because you used to go in to see people
Yeah.
and then it just stopped. So
Yeah.
you've got to find a different way to sell really.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess you've got an internal customer that
Yeah.
you're looking at, and the way that I've always found a challenge is if you're not able to sit in front of somebody, you don't understand their true needs. And I guess in a project,
Yeah.
um, but if you go back to the 90s,
Yeah.
distribution was different as well. You had a lot more choices.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that narrowing of supply chain? I mean, that must have been a challenge.
They were always banging on the door. I mean, there was lots of competition. The old what did we have then? We had there was ITT,
Yeah.
became STC. You
Yep.
had German, you
Yep.
had MEMEC organisations,
Mhm.
with Sasco. There was a
Yep.
whole raft of
Mhm.
companies. Barlick Richfield, of course.
Obviously, Jeff.
And it was a very dynamic
Mm.
situation, and everybody was hungry for business from the
Mhm.
sales. So you did have a lot of competition, but also, of course, the aerospace and defence industry in those days was very much where the manufacturers focused as
Yep.
well. I remember
Yeah.
Texas would
Oh, yeah.
actually make parts to our company spec.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yep.
could you imagine that
Oh,
now?
not now. Yeah.
It's and A&D used to lead
Yep.
the way. And then we started getting into ASICs as well.
Yep.
I remember working with LSI
Yeah. Mhm.
and NEC at one point on Boeing 777, but that changed.
Yeah, and I'd say we talk a lot about this, the way that the aerospace and defense were the driving force of technology.
Mm.
Now we're less than 1% of the semiconductor investment.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge because the likes of the BAEs and the Leonardos of the world still want to have a big voice at the desk, but actually the volumes just aren't there, are they?
No, it is definitely a different dynamic. But there again, I suppose some of the technologies that we're looking at are still leading edge, and there's commercial applications for them. So I think we underestimate really what some of those manufacturers get from those conversations with our type of organisation.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you talk about the flight controls and down at Rochester, if you look at the helmet development over the years and some of those breaking those barriers, I mean, there's some very clever people that are in the industry,
Absolutely.
really are.
One of my first examples of dealing with obsolescence came up on Boeing 777.
Did it really? Well,
Really quite early on, and that was, I think it was a 386 processor was going obsolete. And I remember on Christmas Eve, just scuttling around trying to do the last time buy order for that. So, so obsolescence issues have been around for a long time as well.
yeah, and that's interesting because part of your challenge is that through life support.
Yeah.
And rapid obsolescence nowadays, it's 4 to 5 years you're looking at a replacement.
Yeah.
But the compliance that you have to go to and get that, I guess that's also makes you work close with the engineering team, looking at that alternative. But what was your best tool set to overcome obsolescence then? How did you work that?
What in those
Yeah.
old days, I think because we had that closer relationship with the suppliers.
Yeah, suppliers and manufacturers are there for you.
And we, because it was a smaller manufacturing unit, if you like, not so many projects, but everyone was focused around flight controls. You could have that discussion with the engineers. You could get answers very much quicker. It got funded quicker as well. And I think that as the companies have grown and shed those kind of separate divisions for obvious reasons, for efficiencies, some of that has been lost.
Yeah, I guess I mean, it's changed so much over
Yeah.
the years, and I don't think we'll ever get on top of obsolescence. But having that communication route, I think, is critical. So, what I mean, if you go back through your roles, what's the difference between a commodity manager and a category manager? How do you define that?
Well, I suppose. So when I started in commodity management, so I was chief buyer for Marconi GC Marconi for
Hmm.
one of the divisions, and then I was seconded into an activity working with the likes of McKinsey
Right. Okay.
when BAE Systems was formed, and then commodity management was introduced.
Right.
It was something that so BAE bought part of the Lockheed organisation from the States, and they had a commodity management process
Right.
already in place, and that tended to be um, more about doing big deals.
Okay.
Huge
Yeah.
negotiations,
Hmm.
sat in a hotel room. GC before that had started doing that tentatively with putting all the GC organisation together. So you'd have GC Comms, who used to
Yep.
be up in
Hmm.
Coventry, GC Comms in Genoa.
Yep.
You would have uh, Expelera, even, the air
Hmm.
conditioning
Hmm.
people, Gilbarco, the pump people.
Oh yeah.
So
Hmm.
a whole right, and then of course GEC went and bought, I think it was Realtek and Four Systems at
Hmm.
that just before the dot
Yep.
com
Yep.
boom and bust. But there were big negotiations that went on. You're talking 60, 70,000 line items.
Yeah.
So I suppose that was the commodity management approach. Category management is more about the more holistic approach, and it's about the supplier relationships, the framework agreements. It's more about the understanding the details of the category. I mean, there's very much overlap. It's terminology
Yeah.
in some
Well,
cases.
it is, but I think certainly for the younger buyer, understanding the difference between a more of a strategic approach,
Mm.
more than dealing with the tactical procurement side
Yeah.
of things, and when going back to what you was doing with those global commodity negotiations, that's on a completely different level for placing a purchase order.
Yeah.
You're talking about that long-term programs. You're talking about everything that needs to go on around that.
Yeah.
How do you link engineers into that then? Because one of the things that I've always found is that some engineers will design kryptonite in that you can only buy on a Tuesday from Siberia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you get them on the same pathway as your procurement and commodity strategy there?
I think it's that kind of left shift type approach you need to be in at the outset. You need to understand what they're looking at as a building block stage, a
Okay.
technology building block stage, and
Yep.
trying to influence that. Now, in the old days, you probably had that because the organisations were that much closer
Yep.
and much more concentrated. But I do think if you're going to take out cost and risk, you need to do that right up front.
Yep.
You need to be able to share with the engineering community the commercial relationships that exist,
Hmm.
because you don't want them designing in something where you're not going to either be able to get it, or the relationship that you've got with those suppliers is not going to give you any leverage
Yep.
whatsoever. So I think that closer collaborations are where it needs to be, and I think maybe with AI coming along, that gives an opportunity to actually concentrate on more
You've
of that
opened the
kind of
door of
activity.
AI.
Yeah.
So what? How can a procurement organization that's got the compliance challenges with defense and aerospace,
Yeah.
you've got long-term programs. How do you see AI benefiting that procurement strategy?
Well, I think from a viewpoint of legacy programs, I mean, we can't. Not everything that gets built is going to be a new program.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of there's a lot of legacy
Hmm.
stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff that's in the marketplace already. I think you need to use tools that actually monitor what's happening for the bills of materials.
Yep.
That's more
Hmm.
of a challenge now than
Yep.
it's ever been. So I'd say that there is that could be brought in. Also, I think some of the more administrative type
Hmm.
tasks
Yep.
um, can be taken on by AI. I mean, you've heard a lot talked about that. I
Yep.
don't think there's any real examples of that going on, certainly in aerospace and
Hmm.
defence that I'm aware of at the moment. But I think more and more that is going to come on board, and I think some of that transactional stuff, some of the contracting stuff, will change, and that will free people up to focus on the the kind of the taking out cost and risk right at the outset, I think.
I think that's, I mean, we look at how we're going to embrace AI, and even though Jeff is a tech Neanderthal,
Yeah.
he's very much about how can we work smarter, how can we get more automation. But I think what AI can do for everyone is bring that content to you quicker.
Yeah.
Save you all that time on that research piece. So from an engineering standpoint, they're going to have tools that are going to bring
Yeah.
everything that's available
I
much
think
quicker.
if you kind of put some of that commercial information in front of the engineering, well, not just the engineering teams, but procurement,
Yeah.
all functional areas, then that makes for a better discussion, and maybe that's what's going to bring people back together again
Yeah, I think.
in talking about it.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. That'd be nice. But so where are you heading with the market intelligence? So with you're now set up with your electronics intelligent. Um, I mean, great article you posted a couple of days
Maybe a
ago.
bit too long, but
Oh, do you know what? I actually I liked it because it gave a really different standpoint, and you was trying to bring different perspectives into it. So where's your journey going? What's your plans?
I think well, I think I've still got something to say.
Yeah, yeah,
um, but working for engineering based organisations, maybe the procurement side of it or the commercial side of it um, isn't where the emphasis is.
yeah,
Um, and I just think there's a space there. There's a way that you can help people collaborate more, and I think that's. I mean, I've written obviously about um, the AI and the market intelligence tools. I just think that piece of speeding up things, because we're in a different kind of world, and
yeah.
I think we just need to wake up to that. And also, electronics drives everything.
Mhm.
Yet there's so many people in organisations beyond, maybe even in government, where electronics, yes, they understand it as being very important, but actually a resistor could trip a major project over. And I
Right.
think understanding that supply chain, which is a hugely complex
Mhm.
supply chain, I think there's a lot that I think there's a lot to do there, a lot of information sharing, a lot of knowledge sharing that needs to go on in that space, really.
100% agree. And I think if you look at, there's got to be some major lessons learned from COVID. And I
Yeah,
think the supply chain shock that everyone felt, I mean, just in time or Kanban deliveries work to an extent
yeah,
when things are a normalized market. But I thought with the aerospace and defense, how most people reacted to the ventilator challenge, the rapid engineering change, and it was almost if they had the shackles taken off of them. So it proved that it can be done.
yeah,
Now we've got lots of urgent operational requirements. People are mobilizing quicker. But where I see the benefit of what your knowledge, I mean, you've got decades of
yeah,
experience of different marketplaces. Um, you've built a resilient supply chain, but ultimately we've got this demographic gap, haven't we? We've got like two generations that aren't there.
yeah.
So is that what you're looking to do? Be a bit more thought leadership and give back to the industry that way?
Yeah, I think that's the approach. Um, I've lost my thought now.
Well, the thing is, but that's fine because when you
I
actually
hope you
think,
can edit
yeah,
that.
but when you think about it, you're kind of in a position where you've got all of this knowledge that you've gained over the years. You we've all hit hurdles along the way,
Yeah,
and I think the difficulty is giving that back. Helping the next generation through, creating those pathways, but also guiding them because today they've got all this data-driven
yeah,
activity. We learn through making mistakes.
yeah. It is there's a massive there is a massive information there
Yeah,
that people have to deal with. But I just think that sharing of that kind of knowledge and experience
yeah.
shouldn't be lost in a way.
And I think, again, back to COVID, and I'm sure you saw that through Leonardo, but there was a lot of experienced people decided, I've had
Absolutely.
enough,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Um, and they didn't have the chance to pass that back down. And I think that could be, for us, I think in the aerospace and defense, I go out to customers all across the UK, but actually all across the world. all with the same resource challenge.
Yeah.
Really don't have that experience, that knowledge, that wealth of that second and third generation coming into our market. And I think that's where I really do worry.
Yeah.
And and if you go back to early days, you had, I guess we had working groups, the likes of Component Obsolescent Group, which turned into ION.
Yeah.
Um, but we didn't really know about counterfeit parts back then. And I know you've done a lot of work building that resilience and, building a robust supply. How did you, when did
I
you?
think I think companies like Astute, there
Mhm.
are others obviously,
A good
but
pitch though, good pitch. I like that.
have helped massively.
Mhm. Okay, we're going to take a quick pause from the podcast. If you still want more information, you haven't had enough of us already, follow us on LinkedIn, Market Intel. We've got hundreds of editions. Hopefully, we'll give you some information that will be beneficial. So, so when you look at some of those supply chain risks, we talk about counterfeit parts that early days wasn't a challenge.
Yeah.
Now it is a challenge. And, how did you deal with that? How did you come up with solutions to that supply chain shock?
Well, what pre-COVID or
Pre-COVID, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I suppose you're right. There wasn't so much counterfeit. Well, we weren't probably
We weren't
aware
aware
of,
of it. Yeah.
and probably the components that you were looking at then as well weren't as complex.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
so. But I think there were risks. You had different grades of product.
Hmm.
So if you had a 1N4148, for example,
Yep.
who's to say that someone didn't badge that up as a Gen TX
Yep.
1N41418? So you had to make sure that you had the
Mhm.
right supplies in base in place, and you were not going to everyone and his dog,
Yeah.
and just following the cost of it.
Well,
I
it's
think it's far
interesting.
more of a challenge these days.
Yeah, and it's going back to your article you posted a couple of days ago. I thought what was really key. I think I highlighted one of the points where you say sometimes supply chain find themselves in the middle between engineering and procurement, and you've got to try to keep that guidance, um, but you also further down talk about needing that trusting partner.
Yeah,
So you have to build that first, almost, don't
yeah,
you?
yeah. And I think that's, you can have processes in place, but unless you've got the knowledge and experience and the relationships, that's what you need to back it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you shouldn't lose that side of it.
And that's something that you can bring to, the new journey you're on, that
Yeah.
new pathway is about how you can harness those relationships, how you can embed trust, because I think that needs to be, both ways.
Oh, I think there's a lot of the younger generation. They're more into the um, app kind of
Hmm.
type solution. So you've got to find a way of
Yeah,
actually adapting to how they see the world as well.
100%. I mean,
Um,
you've got a generation who wants answers
yeah,
instantaneously. Sometimes they don't listen to the question; they're already
no,
looking for the answer
yeah,
before
yeah,
you finished. And that educational piece about building those long-term supply chain partners, they don't happen overnight either, do they?
no, no. Well, no, yeah, I remember some guy when I started. He said, "Oh, you've got to be doing this job for like 15, 20 years to actually make any difference."
Really?
Yeah, and now you wouldn't even be giving 15 months.
No.
Everything is accelerated, and that's why I think you need that AI and the market intelligence tools to actually free people up
Yep.
to go back to have those relationships to build the trust and to understand the
Hmm.
market and let AI and other tools take care of the more transactional stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're going to shift away from that. But there's a lot of the industry is still involved, more focused on the transactional stuff. Individual items,
Hmm.
looking at sourcing individual items rather than looking at more of a holistic approach.
Hmm.
Who is going to help us with this? Who can we have the right kind of relationships with, and let them take care of that kind of
So how do you
area.
start to frame the big picture vision?
There's a question. I think it is. I think it is just about talking to people, doing articles. That's how I'm going to start it, and just kicking off a conversation. I think
Okay.
I think that's the way. That's the You've almost got to make it more accessible. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there must be a number of tools that you're looking at. I see, obviously, you're working well with LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And where else are you looking to give that knowledge?
I think, I mean, there's a lot of forums out there. There's an events. We've got the industry events coming up. Previously, I've been involved in some activity that was looking into supply chain resilience.
Okay.
That was being managed by the MOD.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, I'll contribute to that going
Some of
forward
those
as well.
government and industry
Yeah,
working
yeah, yeah,
groups.
yeah, yeah,
And we are, as we develop this, the whole point of the podcast is really about thought leadership and bringing that to that market intelligence
yeah.
to a wider community. But we're also going to be building an engineering community within our new digital platform. So, encourage you to be part
Yeah,
of that
no,
as
I've
well.
been looking at some of your posts, and I've been looking at what you've been. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, and it
I
was
think
all.
maybe that's the bridge that companies like Astute can offer as well. I mean, you have dialogue going on
Mhm.
with engineering, you have dialogue going on with procurement. There's a way of helping bring that together.
Yeah, and it started out because of COVID.
Yeah, yeah,
I think everyone had a thirst for knowledge, knowing and trying to understand what was going on. I think if anyone had a
yeah,
crystal ball back then, they'd have
yeah,
made a lot of money. But then we realised that actually sharing some of that market intel that the marketing team brought together was so valuable.
yeah.
A lot of the key customers were encouraging us to continue that, and it's grown from there. But
I think distribution's changing as well,
oh,
isn't it?
yeah,
That the franchise model. Obviously, that's still important, and the kind of relationships. But some of the manufacturers now are moving. They want to
they went
supply
direct.
direct
Yeah.
themselves, but there's still room for someone to manage that relationship.
Hmm.
I think that's that. Otherwise, it just all they're interested in really is the transaction. They want people to buy their product. They want people to design it in, and there's a piece there where whether that's distribution or a different model can help shape that. I think going forward.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you've known Jeff for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
He's always tried to, our differentiate is to find a way of adding value.
yeah,
We're not a box builder. We're not going to be pushing 10,000 pieces a day. But I do think there is that real need for that service provider that can still be agile enough. I
yeah.
mean, we've grown substantially over the last few years, but find a way to add value.
Yeah, and I think you have got those data intelligence providers,
Hmm.
the AI
Yeah,
providers now, and I think actually merging some of that kind of relationship management with
yeah.
the tools around. I think that's the way forward, and that'll help engage with the new generation that's coming through as well, and you know perhaps help them understand
Yeah.
what's gone in the past, because there is a lot of knowledge there, and it needs to be harvested, if you like.
Yeah, I
And
agree. No, I agree. I think there's a lot of challenges ahead, but I think if we can share some of that experience and
yeah,
knowledge, it's almost giving a bit back, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I kind of been wrapping things up with asking people for a bit of advice that they would give a younger self. Um, you must have been inspired by many people over your career and
yeah.
worked with some incredible and intelligent people, but you've got an aptitude to learn, and you've got a thirst for learning, and I've known you long enough. But what would you recommend somebody coming into the industry today?
I think there's the don't be too rushed about it.
Okay.
I mean, it's ironic I can say that.
Yeah.
Been in the industry 40 odd years, but I think bide your time, understand. Knowledge is never wasted.
Yep.
You know, be
No,
willing,
no.
be willing to learn, willing to listen. I
Yeah.
think, and also be willing to be wrong.
Wow. There you go. Now that's a big enough
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Not many people like to accept that.
yeah. I think if you don't get everything right, that's for sure.
Yeah, and don't always think you're the most intelligent person in the
No,
room.
no, no.
Yeah, there's whether it's an 18-year-old or a 68-year-old, you can still learn, can't you?
Yeah, yeah.
So, book wise, any books that motivated you along the way?
Ooh, book-wise. There's a thing.
I've just finished reading the 5 a.m. Club.
Oh, right, what's that?
I'm an early starter anyway, and it's about harnessing your time when you first wake up.
I tell you what, I tend to listen to podcasts and audio books.
Okay.
But I fall asleep. That's the problem.
Right.
I just go.
So
Every book I read, there's always something that I get out of it.
Yeah.
Every book that I listen to, there's something I get out of it, and trying to piece kind of stuff together. You know, I suppose Great Expectations
okay.
is a book that
Why?
I just always, because that kind of, I suppose someone coming up from a really lowly background and
Yep.
having adversity and
Yep.
getting through, and then thinking they've got there, and then it all comes
Yep.
crumbling down, and then have to build up again, and realizing the value of relationships and life. I think, yeah, maybe that's a book I did during my O levels, I think.
Wow. Right, there you go. But it still resonates into today.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
storyline and the actual pitch of it all. But yeah, look, it's been great talking to
All
you.
right, thanks. That's been good enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the whole point is to give a different perspective on things. You know, we want to try to be educational.
Yeah.
The idea really is that this is an opportunity to give back. I mean, I wish you all the best of luck
All right,
with
thanks very much. I think that
the
thing about,
electronic.
when it comes to electronics, it does affect so
Oh,
many
yeah.
parts of our lives now, and therefore I think an appreciation of what's happening in the supply chain, what you need to manage in terms of the risk is essential for all parts of industry.
Yeah,
really.
100%,
All right.
100%. So, so wrapping up, thanks for listening, dialing in. You can obviously follow Martin Abbotson's Electronic Intelligence, but don't forget, sign up to the Astute Market Intelligence, the Engineering Intelligence, and anything else we can give you. We're going to keep this going, try to vary things around. Yeah, thanks again.